Welcome everyone. My name is Sachin. Today I'll be presenting the Enterprise Risk Management Framework for Lulu Retail Holdings, one of GCC's largest hypermarket operators listed on Abu Dhabi Security Exchange. Here we have identified 118 risks across 16 categories, and today I will walk you through the most critical ones, their impacts, and our recommended actions. Let's look at the agenda for today's topic. First, I will introduce Lulu Retail, review the SWOT and pestle analysis, and highlight the key risks identified through the ERM process. Next, I will discuss the major risk categories, including market liquidity, operational, technology, compliance, environmental, and geopolitical risk. And finally, I will represent stress testing results, risk mitigation strategies, recommendation, and conclude with the future outlook and action plan. Let me just give you a quick company overview. Lulu is a massive retail operation. What makes it interesting from risk perspective is three things. First, it just went public in November 2024, which brings new governance obligations. Second, it operates in eight very different countries simultaneously. Third, its net profit margin is only 2.58%, which means there is almost no buffer if risks materialize. Why does Lulu need risk management? For Lulu specifically, there are four very strong reasons they need a world-class ERM framework. Their ADX listing creates legal obligations. Their thin 2.58 margin means a single bad event can wipe out an entire quarter of profit, and their operations across eight countries expose them to multiple geopolitical shocks at the same time. The SWOT analysis highlights Lulu Retail's strong market leadership as the largest GCC hypermarket chain, supported by strong revenues, a successful IPO, and an integrated supply chain. However, the company faces challenges from thin profit margin, floating rate debt, and limited hedge against currency and fuel price risks. Growth opportunity come from expanding GCC retail demand, e-commerce growth, Saudi Vision 2030, and private label products. Key threats include geopolitical tensions, high interest rates, commodity price volatility, increasing competition, and cybersecurity risks. Overall, Lulu has a strong foundation for growth, but must actively manage financial and operational risks to sustain profitability. This pestle analysis highlights the major external factors affecting Lulu Retail Holdings. Politically, the company benefits from GCC stability, ADQ's strategic banking, and growth initiatives such as Saudi Vision 2030. Although geopolitical tensions and potential disruptions to the Strait of Hormuz remains concerns. Economically, Lulu generated approximately 7.9 billion USD in revenue, but faces pressure from USD 863 million in floating rate debt, while the GCC retail market continues to grow at 4 to 6% annually. Socially, Lulu's 60,000 plus employees and growing consumer demand for premium, organic, and private label products support expansion. Technologically, increasing e-commerce adoption, AI-driven forecasting, and digital transformation are essential to compete with Amazon and Noon. Environmentally, the business faces rising costs from extreme heat, diesel consumption of USD 80 to 100 million annually, and sustainable requirements linked to UAE Net Zero 2050. Legally, compliance with IFRS, data protection laws, AML regulation, and labor laws remains critical. Overall, Lulu operates in a strong growth market but must actively manage financial, regulatory, and operational risks. Here we have identified 118 total risks across 16 categories. The most dangerous categories are market risk, supply chain, operational, and liquidity, all with scores of 15 or above. A score of 15 or more means the risk requires immediate board level escalation and action. We can see the pre-mitigation risk heat map, where risks are plotted based on their likelihood and impact. The red zones represent our highest priority risk, with scores ranging from 15 to 25, indicating significant exposure before any controls applied. We can see that operational, supply chain, and strategic risks are concentrated in high and extreme categories. These require immediate management attention. Market risk. The company has USD $863 million in floating rate debt,
where every 25 basis point increase in IBOR adds around 2.2 million in annual interest cost. Lulu also generates USD 7.93 billion in revenue across 8 currencies without formal FX hedging and spends USD 80 to 100 million annually on fuel. These risks contribute to a 38% decline in net profit and increased pressure on margins. With an interest coverage ratio of 2.5x and a net margin of only 2.58%. Lulu has limited protection against further interest rate, currency, or commodity price shocks.
Market risk treatment using four actions: treat, transfer, tolerate, and terminate. For interest rate risk, we will hedge most floating rate debt with IRS swap, while FX forwards will protect our multi-currency exposure and commodity forwards will reduce food and diesel price volatility. Where risk is smaller or within appetite, we will tolerate it, but we will terminate any speculative or unhedged position that exceed board approval limits. Liquidity risk: the current ratio is below 1, the LCR is under the regulatory minimum before drawdown, and working capital gets squeezed by Ramadan inventory needs. The main risks are covenant breaches, supplier payment stress, and cash trapped in subsidiaries. So the group needs stronger cash buffers and tight liquidity planning.
Treatment: we will use committed facilities, cash pooling, and working capital financing to restore liquidity and absorb short term pressure. Transfer: where possible, we shift funding risk through diversified banks, a sukuk issue, and supply chain finance so we reduce dependence on one source. Tolerate: we accept normal seasonal swings with an approved band, but only if they stay inside our liquidity buffer and forward looking headroom. Terminate: we should eliminate dividend pressure and any short term funding used for long term assets because that weakens resilience.
Operational risk is the chance of loss from failed process, people, system, or external events. In our case, the biggest exposure are cold chain gaps, extreme heat affecting staff, commodity price volatility, inventory shrinkage, and seasonal cash pressure. These risks can hit gross margin, safety, compliance, and brand trust at the same time. The key message is that with thin margins and high operational complexity, even one shock can quickly become a financial and regulatory issue. Our focus is to strengthen monitoring and reduce exposure before these risks cascade across stores and supply chain. Treatment for operational risk. We are treating operational risk by focusing on the numbers that matters most. 100 stores still need cold chain monitoring. 57,000 plus staff face heat exposure and inventory shrinkage is costing around USD 152 million a year. With a net margin of just 2.58%, even a small disruption can have a major impact. That is why we are prioritizing control upgrades, risk transfer, and tighter limits on what we tolerate. The goal is to protect safety, continuity, and profit before losses escalate. Technology risk is one of the most serious threats because so much of business depends on a single SAP ERP system. If that system fails or is attacked, it could disrupt stores, supply chain, payroll, and financial reporting all at once. The exposure is made worse by open compliance gaps, incomplete ISO 27001 certification, and no recent penetration testing, which means the vulnerability surface is still not fully known. In a severe cybercrime event, the financial and operational impact could be extreme, recovery taking months and regulatory consequences adding further pressure. Treatment for technology risk. We treat the core risk by strengthening controls through ISO certification, penetration testing, encrypted backup, zero trust security, and 24/7 monitoring. We transfer part of the exposure through cyber insurance, vendor SLAs, and stronger compliance oversight. At the same time, we tolerate only low-level residual risks while terminating legacy system and unreliable vendors to remove single points of failure across the business. Compliance, legal, and governance risk is driven by a large workforce across 8 jurisdictions. where labor tax, privacy, and governance obligations must all be managed carefully. The main exposure comes from WPS and overtime breaches, PDPL non-compliance, no formal succession plan, and unresolved legal documentation such as the ISDA agreement. If these issues are not controlled, the company could face fines, hiring bans, litigation, regulatory action, and serious reputational damage. Overall, the result is a high risk profile with multiple live exposure that require active management across the business. To counter this risk, we are conducting an audit for WPS compliance with all employees, hiring a DPO, and implementing ISDA master agreement within 30 days. We manage residual risk by using specialized legal advice in all 8 markets, D&O insurance, AML software, and Big Four tax advisors. We accept regular employment, litigation, and small differences in VAT amounts that fall within regulatory limits. Finally, we end all relations with suppliers failing to meet our anti-bribery and ADX criteria. Environmental risk. Lulu is subject to 5 environmental risk factors, each carrying a rating of 12, which is considered high. This includes the UAE Net Zero Initiative, USD 80 to 100 million of unhedged diesel costs, use of plastic packaging, extremely hot temperatures of 45 degrees, and food waste penalties by EAD. Such environmental risks create further financial costs for us, including USD 20 to 30 million annual operating cost. Further, carbon pricing potential ESG downgrade will affect our investors on ADX. Also, logistic disruption during the summer season due to extreme temperature. To treat environmental risk, we are installing solar panels on all hypermarket rooftops by 2027, deploying AI forecasting to cut food wastage below 3%, moving to 50% plastic-free packaging by 2026, and implementing a building management system to reduce AC cost by 20%. We transfer residual exposure through a GRI sustainability report by 2026. Diesel forwards at 70% hedge ratio, environmental liability insurance, and green procurement standards for our top 50 suppliers. We tolerate hard to abate cold chain emissions and phased renewable adoption until 2030. And we terminate relationship with non-compliant suppliers and retire all single-use plastic from own brand products by the end of 2026. War and geopolitical risk. Lulu has its operations spread out across 8 countries in a volatile conflict region. The reason for the high score include the ceasefire between Iran, US, and Israel, the Hormuz Strait being closed by threatening actions which will cut off 90% of our supply lines, increased freight rates from the Red Sea by 60 to 120%, GCC infrastructure strikes in March 2026, and a lack of war BCP. The consequences will be catastrophic, with bare shelves within 48 hours, the possibility of 120 UAE stores being paralyzed, an expatriate population fleeing out by 90% of our clients, and all our USD 7.93 billion revenue being at stake. The response to war is prompt and immediate. We respond by implementing the war BCP, the 90-day fuel and commodity reserve, backup generators at all 256 stores, Cape of Good Hope route reallocation of the top 20 critical SKUs, and staff evacuation plans for the employees. We transport via GCC war insurance policy, hedged 80% on commodity forward, collaboration with UAE Civil Defense at ADNOC, and reporting our war risk to ADX. We accept the logistics cost premium of 30% due to the Cape rerouting and decrease store operating hours in the risk zones as part of the new base cost. Biological risk. COVID-19 showed a biological event can close every store in a market simultaneously for 8 or more weeks. For Lulu, that is approximately USD 1.2 billion lost in revenue. No pandemic protocol, no staff health screening, and no surge e-commerce capacity currently exists to absorb a repeated event. To mitigate this risk, activate a documented pandemic protocol with board approval. Build dark store e-commerce capacity covering 25% of normal store revenue. Establish a direct intelligence line with UAE Ministry of Health for early biological threat warning. The investment is modest. The revenue and reputational protection is critical. AI risk and treatment. First, AI bias, which can lead to unfair business decision and is managed through regular audits and ethical reviews. Second, data privacy and security risks, addressed through encryption, access control, and security audits. Third, operational dependence on AI, where system failures can disrupt operations requiring human oversight and backup processes. Finally, regulatory and compliance risk, which are mitigated through continuous monitoring of AI regulations and strong governance. Together, these measures help ensure responsible and secure AI adoption. We distinguish two types of extreme risk. Gray rhinos are high probability threats we can see but ignore. For Lulu, that's our post IPO earnings miss, with ADX stock already down 36.8%, a 96% dividend payout leaving zero retained earnings, and an EBOR supercycle that could breach our covenants. Black swans are unpredictable but catastrophic. Catastrophic ransomware destroying all 256 stores' SAP and POS systems, a UAE currency peg collapse putting our entire USD 7.93 billion revenue in free fall, or a pandemic more lethal than COVID-19 forcing 8-week full closure. Grey rhinos we must act on now. Black swans we must survive. Derivatives and financial hedging. Interest rate risk on USD 863 million floating debt. We fix it with an IRS and a USD 400 to 500 million sukuk. FX risk across 8 currencies with zero hedging. We deploy rolling forwards and options. Commodity risk on wheat, palm oil, and sugar representing 60% of COGs. We forward contract at 80% hedge ratio with dual sourcing. Diesel risk of USD 80 to 100 million annually with zero hedging. We execute 3 to 6 month forwards and build a 90-day fuel reserve. And critically, all our OTC derivatives are legally unprotected. The ISDA master agreement must be executed within short time.
The following tests were conducted on Lulu to ascertain its stability in various conditions. In the first instance, there is a case of EBOR supercycle where rates will be at 8% for 3 years. Interest charges increase by 60 million per year. Net profits drop from 205 million to 145 million dollar and covenant violation threatens. It is solved by conducting IRS and issuing sukuk. In the second scenario, Hormuz war drives demand down by 25 to 30% with rapid decline in cash flows at our current 2.58 net margins. It is solved by tapping our 2 billion RCF and implementing the war BCP. The maturity gap model confirms a significant negative repricing gap. More liabilities than asset reprice in the near term. A 200 bps IBOR increase adds USD 17 million to annual interest cost. Closing this gap through fixed rate refinancing is the single highest return risk reduction action available to Treasury today. Maturity ladder model. With a base cash balance of AED 2.5 billion, we are cash neutral within 1 month. However, the 1 to 3 month Ramadan purchase period uses up 1.5 billion cash, leaving only 0.9 billion, which is very vulnerable every quarter one. The cash balance builds throughout the rest of the year. However, in the 1 to 2 year category, it falls to AED 0.1 billion due to loan repayment. Under IFRS 9, we apply a provision matrix to USD 420 million of trade receivables. Loss rates escalate from 0.5% on current balances up to 40% on amounts over 90 days late. The total expected credit loss provision is approximately USD 13.5 million. It is manageable, but the USD 30 million sitting over 90 days late at a 40% loss rate is the key watch item. These are some of the recommendation and action plan. Immediately activate VAR BCP, fix the liquidity breach and complete cold chain monitoring. In short term, kill the EBOR exposure with a sukuk, lock down cybersecurity and sort governance. Strategically, win the e-commerce battle before Amazon does. Reroute supply chains away from Hormuz and tell investors the truth about our geopolitical exposure. The plan is clear. The question is the execution speed. After implementing control measures and mitigation strategies, we can see several risks have moved from extreme and high risk zones to medium risk categories, demonstrating the effectiveness of our risk management actions. While a few key risks remains in the high risk area and require ongoing monitoring, the overall distribution indicates a significant reduction in both risk likelihood and impact. This confirms that the proposed controls have strengthened the company's risk resilience while keeping critical risks under active management. Our BCP is built on four pillars. First, business impact analysis. A POS failure costs AED 8 million per hour. SAP downtime shuts our entire operation, and a cold chain failure triggers regulatory closure. Second, recovery strategies. Our most critical system have RTOs ranging from immediate for cold chain, 1 hour for e-commerce to 4 hours for SAP, all backed by AWS infrastructure and satellite fallback. Third, plan development. From alerting the CRO within the first hour to filling our mandatory ADX disclosure within 2 hours, to staff communication and media statement within 4 hours. Fourth, testing and exercises. ISO aligned with quarterly drills now integrating war and Ebola scenarios. A plan that isn't tested is just a document. In conclusion, Lulu's key priority for 2026 is strengthening resilience against major geopolitical, operational, and biological risk. With financial year 2025 revenue reaching USD 7.93 billion, protecting business continuity is critical. The company must complete its operational resilience initiatives, including IoT integration, ISO compliance, and enhanced BCP testing. At the same time, digital transformation remains a strategic necessity. It is supported by AED 500 million investment plan. Finally, stronger governance and transparent risk disclosure will help protect investor confidence and support Lulu's long term leadership position across the GCC.